Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Lori Fogelman.
Thank you, everyone. As you continue to make your way to your seats, we want to re-welcome you back to our 2015 Leadership and Innovation Summit here in the beautiful new home of the Hankamer School of Business, the Paul L. Foster Campus for Business and Innovation. We are turning our attention and our energy now to energy. And we're looking at the energy industry, and we have some phenomenal leaders with us today to discuss this. Bringing expert insight today are our distinguished panelists, beginning with Mr. Paul Foster. In 1997, Mr. Foster founded Western Refining to handle the assets of a bankrupt refinery in El Paso, Texas. In 2000, Western Refining bought that refinery in El Paso, and Mr. Foster's vision of owning a company in the oil and gas industry became reality. The company he founded grew to become a publicly held company that today owns and operates refineries, pipelines, terminals, petroleum product wholesale outlets, fleet fueling stations, storage and transportation assets, and convenience stores in the Western and Midwestern United States. He is a 1979 graduate of the Hankamer School of Business. Next is Mr. Mark McCollum. Mr. McCollum is Executive Vice President and Chief Integration Officer for Halliburton and is also a member of the company's executive committee. Halliburton was founded in 1919, and it's one of the world's largest providers of products and services in the energy industry. In this capacity, Mr. McCollum is leading the joint integration team that Halliburton and Baker Hughes Incorporated have assembled in connection with Halliburton's pending acquisition of Baker Hughes. Previously, he served as Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, and then Senior Vice President and Chief Accounting Officer. Mr. McCollum also is a member of the Baylor University Board of Regents. He received his BBA from Baylor in 1980. And finally, Mr. Bob Simpson, also a Baylor graduate, earning his bachelor's degree in accounting and finance with magna cum laude honors in 1970 and his MBA from the university in 1971. Bob Simpson spent more than 15 years in oil and gas finance and accounting before becoming the co-founder of Cross Timbers Oil Company. In 1991, Cross Timbers became XTO Energy Incorporated. And Mr. Simpson continued as chairman of the board and chief executive officer until 2009, and that's when XTO was sold to Exxon Mobil. His leadership at XTO was recognized by numerous publications, including Barron's, which named him among the 30 most respected CEOs in the world, Oil and Gas Explorer Executive of the Year, Institutional Investors Best CEOs, and also Business Week Top 50 Performers, among others. During his tenure, XTO Energy became the second largest natural gas producer in Texas and the 8th largest in the nation. The year following the sale, Mr. Simpson became part of the ownership group of the Texas Rangers. He currently serves as co-chairman of the board of the Major League team. And facilitating today's conversation is Dr. Ray Perriman. Dr. Perriman is president and CEO of the Perriman Group, which is an economic research and analysis firm based here in Waco, Texas. He holds a BS in mathematics from Baylor and a PhD in economics from Rice University. Dr. Perriman has been called a genius by the Wall Street Journal, a world-class scholar by Business Week, the unofficial state economist by the New York Times, the most quoted man in Texas by Texas Monthly, and his personal favorite, the state's premier barbecue connoisseur by the Dallas Morning News. He's published several books and more than 400 academic papers. His academic appointments include 10 years as the Herman Brown Professor of Economics and 5 years University Professor and economist in residence here at Baylor University, as well as 5 years as business economist in residence at SMU. Please join me in welcoming our panelists as I hand over the conversation to Dr. Ray Perriman.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in this incredible facility and be back here on campus again. I don't get to campus very much these days. And I congratulate Terry and Judge Starr and everyone else who's been involved in this. Terry it was mentioned in the program, the dedication point, that Terry was one of Paul's professors and had a great influence on his life. Terry was also one of my professors. And I have to say, he's like a grandfather to me. I mean, I love him. I truly do. I truly
All right.
I just wish he'd influenced me as well as he influenced Paul. But in any case, we're here to talk about energy, and the technology panel is a tough act to follow. We got to watch it, and it was incredible. They got to talk about all the new gizmos and stuff. I think our topic is a little different, but certainly one that's very interesting and certainly very meaningful to the state. I'm going to spend just a few minutes with a very, very high level kind of what's happened recently thing, kind of set the stage, then turned over to these guys. And it should be very interesting because we have a person in Mark who produces oil and makes equipment for oil all over the country. We have a guy who spent his career in natural gas, and we have a guy who buys a lot of oil. And so there's a lot of different perspectives here, and I think it should be a good conversation. Basically, if you look at oil in Texas, very briefly, I'm going to go back to the last oil boom very, very briefly, back in 1973 to 1981. And by the way, that was a period the rest of the country called the energy crisis. Governor, here in Texas, we call it the oil boom. You know, that's exactly right. It's the same thing, just a different way of looking at it, different perspective. And basically, between 1973 and 1981, the price of oil went from $3 a barrel to $36 a barrel. And, you know, basic law of economics, if you're selling something and the price goes up 1,200% and people are still buying it, that's good, okay? You just keep that in mind. And so basically what happened was, obviously you had the thing that got all the publicity was the Arab oil embargo. What had the real impact was the OPEC countries cut production. But I don't want to talk about any of that. Something else happened in 1973 that people don't remember. The production of oil fell in Texas, and it fell for the first time since Spindletop. And it fell every year from 1973 to 2008. Whether the price of oil was high like the oil boom or low like the oil bust, it didn't matter. No matter if there were 1,100 rigs running or 200 rigs running, it didn't matter. The production of oil fell every year simply because the fields were old, and no matter how much we tried, we couldn't get out what geology was taking away. Fast forward to about 15 years ago, and a bright idea hit some folks. Basically, a gentleman by the name of George Mitchell that had some property up around Fort Worth, a gentleman from Galveston, Houston area, who was very successful on many fronts. But basically, the idea was this. Ever since we started drilling for oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania, in the 1850s, and by the way, my lovely wife, Lorraine, and I went and saw that well a few years ago. It's fascinating. You should go see it if you haven't been there, where they found oil at 69.5 feet. If they had to go to 75, I don't think we'd ever had an oil industry in Texas, given their technology. But regardless, from that time until very recently, what we were trying to do was find the oil that seeped out of these rocks and pooled up in places. All of a sudden they said, what if we could get inside the rocks? Why did we get the oil if it's seeping out of rocks, and that's what we're finding, there's got to be a lot more in the rocks. And those rocks primarily are shale rocks. They're very, very dense rocks. And so if we can figure out a way to get inside the rocks, we can get to a lot more oil. And that's basically what hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, all the modern technologies are all about, is getting inside those rocks and getting that oil out. Once that happened, the whole world changed in a dramatic way. In 2000, production fell for 35 straight years. Between 2008 and 2015, we got back 30 of those years of production in Texas. Oil production went from 1 million barrels a day in 2010, we're not talking ancient history here, to 3.5 million barrels a day at the end of last year. Absolutely incredible. The whole world changed. 6, 7 years ago, major companies, including the one that purchased your company, Bob, were looking at spending billions of dollars to build facilities on the coast to import natural gas. They are now spending billions of dollars on the same plots of dirt to build facilities to export natural gas. The whole dynamic of the world industry has changed in that shorter period of time. Now, along the way, we managed to produce a whole lot of gas at first, and the price went down. Then we produced a whole lot of oil, and then we were beginning to see that price go down as well. It went down because of increase in supply, slowdown in the global economy, demand. Economists like to talk about supply and demand. It also went down because the dollar got stronger and oil is priced in dollars. It also went down because some of the Middle Eastern countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, began to do something, and I apologize for the lingo, the technical name for this is messing with us, okay? They decided they wanted to try to shut it down, and they could, if they got prices low enough, long enough, they might be able to do that. So that kind of brings us to where we are today. So with that, what I've thought I would do is turn this over to each one of these guys, let them give you a perspective, whatever they want to talk about from their perspective, then we'll take the conversation from there, from wherever it goes. So Mark, I turn it over to you.
Well, you know, thinking about this being an innovation summit, and it was interesting, we talk about these technologies that we're using, hydraulic fracturing, directional drilling. It's the combination of those two that really opened up the shales, but they're not new technologies. I mean, Halliburton did the first hydraulic fracturing job in 1949. In directional drilling, we started directional drilling, in the 80s, I guess, when we opened up the Austin Chalk. I mean, they're not new. It was the innovation of using them in combination that really drove the shale boom that we've seen today. And I think, you know, there obviously are a lot more innovations that we're constantly working on. We're sitting here today in a sort of an ugly environment in our world. You know, the rig count is down more than 50%, and the prices are down more than 50%. And what that does is it sort of forces innovation again. You know, we've got to think differently about what we do and how we do it to shave cost out of the drilling process. But we will. I mean, I think the industry always innovates. It may look differently than the technology space that we talked about earlier, but there's constant innovation that's happening. And today, I mean, I think the remarkable thing that we're sitting here is that the U.S. now is the swing producer in the world. We can bring on shale faster. We can drill wells in 5 days and complete them very fast. We can bring it on faster. We can bring it on cheaper than any other place in the world. And that's a huge, we're going to have to change all of our thinking around this area if we're going to be the leader in the energy space in the future.
Bob?
Yeah, you know, the one way to think about our business is, and I heard them talking about in technology, is we've been reinvented. Most of the last 100 years, oil and gas was hard to find. You know, the Wildcatters got famous, and so it's like finding chimneys in the pasture as opposed to a blanket. The blanket is the source rock, and so some of these fields are 50, 100 miles across, okay? And so it doesn't take particular expertise to find it anymore. It's more of a manufacturing process where those that will survive are the ones that are most efficient at drilling and completion and driving those costs down. And frankly, it's become a little boring as opposed to what it once was. But the beneficiaries are all of us in terms of the consumer side. America's got the cheapest energy in the world. And so the reindustrialization of America is real. It's founded on cheap energy. You're having all kinds of manufacturing start back up, fertilizer plants, you know, ammonia, chemicals. Cheapest source of fuel in the world is America. You know, the natural gas sells for, at the wellhead, the equivalent today of about $15, $16 a barrel. All right, people importing natural gas, liquefied natural gas, have been paying, you know, the last decade, you know, $80 to $100 equivalent barrel for LNGs. And so here in America, you know, that is a new thinking. It's an advantage. And so XTO was one of the leaders in this technology. One fact I would dispute, actually, by the time we merged with Exxon, we were the largest gas producer in the United States of about 3 Bs a day. Now Exxon, with what they were already doing and with what they got from us, is by far the largest. You know, the interesting thing to me is to be part of an experience that we're building a company that became larger than any major in America. And, you know, it starts with good people and day-to-day hard work and repeating the process over and over took about 20 years. But it was built in Fort Worth, and I'm proud of that too, not Houston. So I fought hard to stay out of Houston, starting when I got out of Baylor. I talked Arthur Anderson into letting me go to Fort Worth, so I worked hard to get up there. I'm a small town West Texas boy, so
Houston's not so bad.
and so you know, it's not as good as Fort Worth. Anyway, Fort Worth is the secret's getting out about that town, but it's a great place to raise a family. I've been there since '71. But you know, back to the oil and gas. As we went through it, gas led the way. The one that was first to increase supply in America dramatically was natural gas. And in the last decade, natural gas production in America is up 40%. Okay, now the amazing thing is that demand's pretty well kept up with it by growth in electricity, manufacturing electricity from it, and also displacing coal. And so has about half the emissions of coal and oil. And so it's by far the cleanest burning fuel in the world that's basically of anything of size. We'll talk about wind and solar and that myth here in a second, which one of the things you can learn today is I've got some interesting statistics that we all need to know and share because they're really kind of hidden from us. And so as we built the natural gas industry up 40%, that was led by manufacturing through hydraulic process of finding large fields. In 1979, I built a home in Fort Worth. Now, it was a new addition, couldn't get natural gas. You could only get electricity for a new addition back then. We were, quote, running out of natural gas, for those of you who remember that period. And so it was deemed to be not the fuel of the future, as the fuel of the past. We were thought to have, as a nation, about a 7-year supply of it at current production rates in that year. Now, my house that I built was sitting on one of the largest natural gas deposits in America. Turned out to be the Barnett Shale, which today makes about not quite 10% of U.S. supply, but it's been a wonderful, it was the first major addition in the shales. And I thought originally and mistakenly that it would be the gold standard and probably not be duplicated because it was that special and pretty shallow. But just in case it went other places, I led my company to take positions in like 6 other basins. And then by 2008 and 9, I could see they were all going to work. And I said, you know, this is a different game. The price is going to be different. This belongs to a major with much more capital than my company. And so we merged with Exxon in about a $41 billion merger in 2010. Gas was $6 then, and a little higher, $6.50. It's less than half that today. So for my owners and their wealth, it was a wonderful thing to do. And so, but I always look back on it and say I wasn't particularly smart. I just had information that I knew was true. And wouldn't have believed it unless we had our own drilling rigs and seeing it happen. So with that event, you know, we became an large independent. But with pride, it's still part of Exxon. They've left it named XTO, and it lives today. And they've left it in Fort Worth. So I talked them into that. Anyway, now they're moving people from Houston to Fort Worth to be part of XTO. And it's, you know, the office there was about 1,500 when we merged in town. It's about 3,500 now. They're moving. They've consolidated all of U.S. production under that independent, all the production they owned already. And it's been very successful for Exxon. as a venture. But if you look at, there's two different markets to understand. One's the gas market, and gas is captured here, not imported into America. We make it all, and we've led enough to cut the price in less than half and stimulate this economy. Oil, on the other hand, is still imported. And I want to go through a few stats that you'll find interesting, and I know that Paul can tell you some more, but I'm going to reach over into the oil market for a second. We consume about 20 million barrels a day in America. That's out of 2 or 3 million barrels a day in the world. All right, that's a little over 21% that we consume here in America. We do that with 5% of the population. Okay, so we are petroleum hogs in this country, always have been. We're by far the largest consumer in the world. If China had the per capita consumption of oil that we do, they'd need all the oil in the world for just that one country. As it is, we burn about 20, they're about 11 million barrels a day, and that's almost doubled the last decade. So they're the fastest growing incremental in energy. Ours is, in the world of oil, has been relatively flat because of conservation efforts, cars get more miles. But on the other hand, it's been relatively flat at close to 20 million barrels. Now, if you look at what's our largest energy source in America, it's oil. It's about 35% of all energy needs. So it's number one by far. And second is natural gas at 28%. Okay, so that's 63. You've got coal at 18. You've got nukes, or nuclear at 8. And then you've got, we're getting on down the road, you've got biomass, which I guess is firewood and trash. It's about 5%. It's much higher than you'd guess. Now, what do you think that wonderful wind, wind, geothermal, and solar is? Of all of our needs, this is the most talked about, most subsidized energy in the world, in America, and it's billed under this administration as, you'd think it's huge. It's 2%. Okay, that's it. And that's after growing it a little bit. So, the reality of it is that is not going to supply energy for this country or the world remotely anytime in our lifetimes. Now,
thanks, Bob. As my role as panelist, I got to keep it.
Okay, let's go.
Here. So before I turn it over to Paul, I will have to say though, very dear friend of mine, you have indeed paid it forward today, my friend, as you said this morning. This is amazing, absolutely amazing.
I'll just comment very briefly on, I'm in the oil refinery business, and so we're the guys that buy the oil from the producers and manufacture gasoline and diesel and lots of other things. And we're sort of at the right end of the business right now. We're actually making a lot of money and our margins are good. That's not always the case. The reason I was able to start my company was because of a bankruptcy of a refinery, and then I ended up buying that refinery and kind of putting it all back together. But it's a very cyclical business. And like these other guys, we depend very heavily on technology. 35 years ago, there were over 300 refineries in the U.S., and today there are 143. But the refining capacity of those 143 is more than the 300 that we used to have. And so the refineries we have, there aren't going to be any new ones built despite all the noise you hear about it. But the refineries that are out there continue to expand, continue to become much more technologically advanced, become much more efficient. And so our challenge is to be the best operator that we can be, and because we're competing with some big guys. and to manage our commodities and our finances responsibly and try to survive the tough times, just like the producers are doing right now, and be there to make money when there's money to be made. So it's a very interesting business. Yeah.
It's always the hard part is that at some point in the cycle, one of us makes money and good returns, but the other guys don't.
That's right. That's right.
It goes
right,
this way. So.
That's why we separated the two. But no, the two of the three of you talked a lot, and Bob to some extent, but Mark and Paul, you both talked about technology as a big driver. That was our first panel, was about technology. It's a driver of everything these days, as was said. One aspect of technology, obviously, with the shale is because you're breaking up very dense rock in a very expensive way, it's expensive energy to get out of the ground relative to a lot of other energy. That the cost is anywhere from $65, $70 a barrel, where people start doing a lot of activity historically. The technology's been improving. There's other technologies coming online. There's more technology coming online in refining. How do you see break-even cost right now as far as if we were, for things to start happening again? I suspect it's a lower number than it was before. And then what do you see in the future, and what do you see in the future in refining as well? New things for us to look for.
Break-even prices can float around a lot. There's a big component of it we were talking about earlier that relates to whether or not you're in the core of the resource that you're drilling in. How much money did you spend on acquiring the acreage that you're drilling? What's your financing? How levered are you in the interest costs? But if you kind of assume that a producer makes reasonable decisions about where they acquire acreage and all of that, it really comes down to overall lowering the cost per barrel of oil equivalent that we drill. Right? Everything we're doing is trying to drive that, and there are a lot of different ways you can do it. We do it. Bob talked about sort of a manufacturing process. Surface efficiency, designing equipment that works together well. That you can pad drilling as an example today, are all ways we can drive costs. There are ways to use chemistry, custom chemistry, which is a form of technology for us. We've got huge groups of scientists working on different chemical ways to try to unlock the rock itself. But you start getting down to a large part of driving the cost down relates to reducing uncertainty and increasing automation. And when you're talking about reducing uncertainty, that really means that using technology today, we've got almost across the U.S. pretty good pictures of the rocks down there. A lot of seismic data that's been captured. A lot of that sits in different offices, but not always in forms that's usable. But translating that information into huge data banks of information, and then using three-dimensional modeling. Actually, today we've got tools that we can go out on the rig and, we can tell you how to drill it, where to drill it, how to frack it, where to frack it. We can actually design how the fractures move using that three-dimensional, technology, sort of the picture of the rock underneath that helps to try to drive out uncertainty. I think, one of the things that we're spending a lot of time on in our industry also is about 30% of our cost is labor. I mean, our business is a very labor-intensive business, and I think over time, as we put wire in our pipes, there's a lot of automated tools that we're doing, but it's at some point really having automated drilling, automated completions, where essentially you got rigs working out there with not a crew of 20, but a crew of 2. I think is in the future. And it's a little bit like driverless cars. It's the way we talk about it. It's driverless. If you think about it, most accidents on the road happen because of drivers, as people. So the idea from Google and others is let's just take the people out. Well, that's a huge leap, because mentally we always go, wait a second, that how are you going to stop accidents if you don't have any intelligence? Well, how do you define intelligence, right? So it's a leap, even for us in the industry to say we're not going to have people on the rigs, but I think it's the future. But I say all that price to me is a lagging indicator. It's a factor of supply demand. right now. We got too much supply relative to the demand growth that we're seeing. I think we have a unique issue in the U.S. because we can export, so we create our own problem in this, that could be dealt with differently. But I think long term, we can have a cheaper resource because we can get to it cheaper, but it's going to take technology and automation to do it.
Yeah.
I think it's probably true in your business too, Paul, right?
Yeah, it is, and that's one of our big challenges is to always stay ahead of the technology, both the chemistry and all the catalytic processes in the various processing units, but also the automation in the refinery. And like you said, I mean, we used to have people all over the refinery. Now we just have people in a control room watching screens and hopefully paying attention to what they're doing. And so, yeah, that's a big challenge for us. And another challenge, I mean, we have you mentioned all this new oil that's being produced, but it's a different kind of oil. And, we're producing a lighter, sweeter crude, and it's a challenge for us as a refiner to figure out what to do with it, and creating some logistics opportunities for us as well. But it also points to, you mentioned that we can't export crude, and that's in my opinion, a ridiculous law, but it is the law, and it's something we have to deal with. And if we were able to export crude, then we could balance the market, and we could bring the right crudes to the right refineries, as opposed to having a bunch of crude, having the wrong crude log jammed there. Now, my shareholders wouldn't want to hear that, because the truth is, we make money off of that law, so they can kind of take their time changing it, but it's changing. The technology's changing. The crude oil production is changing, and we need to continue to be a leader, we as a nation, and change with it. So.
We're supposed to be talking about business and technology. We've talked a little bit about technology. I want to switch to business. And a big part of the business, I know this affected all three of you, is government and the role government plays. And there's several, the environmental aspects, things like policy, like the export ban you just mentioned, Paul. But another big one just has to do with the overall regulatory process. You and I have had conversations in the past about your acquisitions you've made and some of the issues you've had to go through with some of those. I know you went through a major merger a few years ago, Bob. And as the chief integration officer, Mark's going through the middle of a very big one right now with Halliburton and Baker Hughes. So I'd like to get your perspectives on that whole process, what impact it has on the business, the cost structure, just whatever you want to talk about. But Mark, let's start with you. But all three of you have had experiences in this area. So,
how much time do we have?
If I have to cut you off, I will.
I can go for a while.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a very interesting process. I mean, obviously, government regulation has an appropriate place Absolutely. For certain things that we do. We talk about, in our drilling process, thinking about environmental hazard and the worker safety and things like that. We get in this merger and acquisition process. It's been a unique experience for us. We, as a global business, 80 countries, Baker Hughes is in 80 countries. We've had to file with 40 different competition authorities around the world. I mean, it used to be the U.S. was the large one. Now the other countries are in flexing their muscle, and today the European Union and the European Commission there is trying to show they sort of got more teeth than the Department of Justice. I told some folks we have filed. We announced the merger last November, so we've been in the process of the regulatory approvals. We filed 14 million documents with competition authorities, not pages, documents. And there's no regulatory authority in a lifetime that could read all those documents. But going through that process, it's hard to know whether it has a bent because of the administration or whether it's sort of the new normal. It could be in Europe that it's the new normal. You saw GE, in our space in Alstrom, it took them 18 months to get through the European Commission. And the thing that's most disconcerting is, if you research mergers and acquisitions and integration in my job, that 7 out of 10 integrations don't work well, and they tell you, well, why is that? Well, the first thing is lack of speed. You got to move fast. If you don't move fast, things can fall apart. People leave. Uncertainty around things, just can cause things to really go off the rails. And so the inability to move quickly because competition authorities, and the regulatory approval process just moves glacially is a real concern. And so we're fighting it. The problem is not a lot you can do. I mean, it becomes an expensive process. It's a full employment deal for the lawyers.
Yeah.
Lawyers have done great, but it's not necessarily I think value added for our shareholders.
Yeah. Bob, do you have any comments about your experience with that, with the merger and acquisition process?
Yeah, ours went pretty well. Actually, when we had our congressional hearings, the legislators, the hearings went well, and actually they encouraged Rex to buy us because they saw that as they recognized XTO as being a pioneer in the technology. They wanted to see the industry expand. Cheap energy is good for America, and so Rex Tillerson, who's chairman, he and I testified together that day, said that was the best experience he'd ever had in front of him. So we had a rather pleasant experience.
Probably having mostly domestic assets probably had played a big role because you didn't have to deal with some of the things.
It was because of that, and so I didn't really see that. Yeah, as far as day-to-day regulations, they're getting worse and more expensive, and this particular administration's done about all they could to slow us down, and at the same time take credit for what we're doing. Which has been a little frustrating, but it's just the truth. And one last comment on natural gas supply. I don't know if I got it out a while ago, but that 7 years of supply is now over 100, and so we're secure for natural gas. The oil side, they talk about us having a glut of oil. That glut is, don't be mistaken, that glut's not in the U.S. We only produce about 9 million barrels a day of that 20 we use. And so we're still importers.
Yeah, I don't really think we have a glut.
Yeah.
I think we just
and so the
imbalance.
Yeah, the glut is worldwide. It's not in the U.S. And so we're secure in gas and still working on the oil deficiency.
Paul?
From a regulatory, probably the worst experience we've had. Dealing with regulatory agencies on a daily basis is painful. But we merged with a company back in 2007. We acquired Giant Industries, and the Federal Trade Commission challenged it, and we had a big trial. It went all the way to trial. And it was just it was really an eye-opening experience to realize, number one, how dishonest and how inefficient our federal government is, and the lengths that they will go to try to win an argument that they don't even have a good argument. And so I've really kind of soured. Not that I was ever really high on the federal government, but that was a very painful and difficult experience that was completely unnecessary. We did ultimately prevail, and which good for us.
I remember when you were going through it. We talked about it several times.
Yeah, it was quite an experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to come back to technology or back to business, a few other issues. But given where we are and what we're doing and who's here, I want to make sure our time doesn't run short. Let's talk a few minutes about the educational aspect, the careers. A lot of grads of the business school have gone into the energy industry in various forms, or into the financing side, and end up specializing in energy, whatever the case may be, interacting with people in other schools around campus. What do you see as the evolving situation in terms of jobs, opportunities, recommendations you would give to students related to the energy industry?
You want to start?
Yeah, I'll be brief. For us, chemical engineers, there aren't a lot of them, and beyond that, there aren't a lot of really good ones. But we need a lot of chemical engineers in our industry, and the age of the workforce is way up there. I forget the statistics. But there are a lot of opportunities in engineering, and then always on the business side, finance, accounting, and IT. Cybersecurity is a huge issue for anybody in the energy industry. And so there are a lot of career opportunities, and Baylor has a big role to play in filling that role.
Anybody want to add to that?
No, I'll add it. We were giving the previous panel so hard time for, ragging on the accountants and the finance guys. But obviously from my perspective, I think that finance and accounting is still an incredibly important role to play. As I look at businesses, from integration or others, I'm always amazed at how in this day of age, we've got more automation, we've got more information coming, and we need people who know how to maneuver through that information and turn it into knowledge and help guys make business decisions. Accounting is the language of business, and I think having people that can interpret that is an incredibly important skill. I think engineering. Clearly we are across the nation. We are short of engineers. We are just. It's amazing to me how hard it is to find really good quality engineers. To come into our programs and to roll up their sleeves and work hard. And I think a combination of kids who maybe have engineering and some business acumen. That's a home run career path for them.
Yeah, the engineering combined with an MBA, for example, is pretty great. What I would tell a kid, particularly going to this business schools, that again, there's traditional accounting, finance. You may not work in the energy industry the first day you get out of school if you want to go into it, but there's some great routes available that will, you could go through public accounting, you could go through investment banking, there's other avenues to get there and eventually specialize in it. And you'll acquire some rounding skills along the way that will give you the ability to maybe do more than you knew you could. In my own case, I ended up running an oil and gas company. The most frequent question I've got in my career, am I a reservoir engineer or a geologist? And the CPA is the strange answer, but it's possible.
We're all
It's possible coming in.
I wasn't going to mention that. But.
This is a great school for that degree in finance. What I would tell a kid, if you want to go into that, again, there's other ways. And the most important thing is to apply yourself and to do what you do it well every day, even though you may not be in your dream job yet. That's the way to get out, is to excel where you are and do it now, and not say, I would do a better job if I was doing what I wanted to do. Do what you do now and do it great.
Of course, I should have given a shout out to the lawyers, because we're talking about regulatory.
Yeah, that's the people
clearly
you're employing.
Lawyers, they got,
that's right.
Got a great
we have maybe time for 3 or 4 minutes for like one more very quick thing. And so I think something Paul sort of teed up, I think anybody's pretty interested in. There's a lot of talk right now about the whole issue of the oil export ban and that sort of thing. Quick historical perspective, we did this in the 70s during the energy crisis. We did a lot of things during that time. It was kind of crazy from the beginning. Paul's industry certainly liked it, but we prohibited the exporting of crude, but not the exporting of refined products. So your U.S. crude could still go anywhere in the world. It just had to be refined first. Yeah. And so it never did make a whole lot of sense to begin with. It certainly doesn't now, but I'll let you guys weigh in on that.
Go ahead, I already spoke to it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that, one of the things that probably chafes as an industry a little bit is that, we're spending a lot of time dialoguing about lifting bans on Iran and, letting that crude, but yet we have a ban on our own crude, and we're not talking about lifting that ban on this industry. And it just seems like that just runs against the grain of everything from a democratic, free country process, having that ban just does not fundamentally make sense. I recognize that there were political reasons to do it at the time, and trying to protect, our interest at that point. But today, if, again, as I said earlier, if we're going to have to embrace the idea that we are the swing producer. And with the amount of capital that's out there, with that, the ability to bring on crude and natural gas as fast as anyone in the world and easier, the world is going to rely on us. The Saudis had been the swing producer for many, many years. They just don't have the capability to do it anymore. I think that, when they ratcheted up production earlier in the year, or a little bit, not a lot there for them to do. to sort of push prices down. I think they thought they would kill our industry.
Yeah.
And we proved them wrong. They didn't kill the industry. It's still here. We're certainly operating at a lower level, but I think that it just goes to show you that the resiliency of the American oil industry is such that we have a different role to play in the global economy with regard to energy and energy distribution. And if we don't lift it, what we're going to be resigned to are these wild cycles. You know, where right now, you know, we're overproducing, we'll cut back, you know, there'll be a response. You know, we talk to our customers. We've let 20% of our workforce go in the last year because of where we are in the cycle. When all of a sudden production starts to roll, and now the rig's going to come back on, well, we can't, I mean, to go back and hire those people in a 3% unemployment world, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to take longer to do, and we're going to drive prices back. You know, so we create this roller coaster economy for us in our nation, rather than the rest of the world. The rest of the world's going to be fine, but we're going to, you know, we'll be playing havoc if we don't do something to change the dynamic and take control of oil distribution around the world.
Yeah, you know, the important thing about oil and gas is the ability to get the source rock. That's the most buggy whip change in this industry in 100 years. And it will be in the next 100. That's happened. Now we're into cost and how do we make it cheaper and so forth. But, you know, to be able to get to the source rock is the final answer in terms of supply. These wells are expensive. They probably average $7 or $8 million a day. I mean, $7 or $8 million to drill one, okay? So they're not cheap. So therefore, they're a function of rate of return of whether or not the capital goes in.
Cheaper than a deep water well. But.
Yeah, and so now the world needs us. One thing that we can't forget is that supply demand is grown a lot. That's true, but it's probably, you know, demand in the world is probably up 30 million barrels a day since '85. All right, now it grows about a million and a half barrels a year. Okay, the OPEC, frankly, at some point can't supply that, so they're going to turn to this industry and to America, and then ultimately, you know, we'll be a source of what takes care of the world and helps with the U.S. But, you know, this is temporary. This price you're enjoying today is also temporary. It should be somewhat higher, 50% higher probably, to cause our industry to function efficiently, and so that's going to happen. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, despite the fact you're three recovering accountants, I can't imagine that we could have had three people who know more about energy than the three of you do. I hope this has been very enlightening to you. It certainly has been to me, and I thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all. Thanks again to our distinguished panelists here with us. We will begin our healthcare forum at 4 o'clock, but waiting in the wings right now are Baylor undergraduate and graduate students who want to have the opportunity to make a meaningful connection with you, their fellow Baylor grads and friends of the university. So join us now for an important networking time here at the Paul L. Foster Campus for Business and Innovation. Network with our students and enjoy a Dr. Pepper float. You don't want to miss that while you're on the Baylor University campus. And we will come back and begin our healthcare forum at 4 o'clock. Thank you.